All right, welcome back to It's Just ADHD, where we talk about the science of different things that are on our minds. Tara, why are we here today?
Yeah, we are here today to talk about the eyes test. This is probably a more diverse audience today. I'm guessing some of you are here because you watched the Rehearsal season 2 and you saw this test and the way that they represented autism, and you're like, hey, is this test legit? Why did I fail it? You want to get more answers. Some of you are probably here because you just got done taking an autism assessment and they administered an eyes test, and you're like, what the hell just happened? And some of you are just here to learn about autism, and that's all cool. We're happy to have all of you. Stay tuned for today. We are going to go really deep into this test and its validity, as well as how it plays into this broader big picture of theory of mind. And there's this absolutely wild soap opera between researchers who debate how you even define autism. Like, this gets at the heart and soul of what is autism. And I say soap operas as much as something like research can be dramatic. This one is science dramatic. So let's get into it. Let's give you all the tea and tell you all the details of this test.
Welcome to It's Just ADHD. We're two curious ADHD coaches, and we're going deep on the how, the why, and the strategies to get through the difficult moments and how to make the best of life with ADHD. I'm John, and I've got an adult diagnosis of ADHD.
And I'm Tara, and I have a late in life ADHD diagnosis and an even later autism diagnosis. We're going to be diving headfirst into the messy and often complicated research around ADHD and autism. And we're bringing you along for the journey as we break it all down and make sense of everything.
Because sometimes it's just life.
And sometimes it's just ADHD.
Awesome. Yeah, this is interesting. This is one that I first found out about from watching the Rehearsal, and I know we've had a lot of conversations and been having a lot of conversations about the Rehearsal and the way it represents autism and the autism journey. And it was surprising to me and interesting the way he was taking the eyes test, the way Nathan Fielder was taking the eyes test in the show, and how much it was showing like how he was like processing through the information, and how like at first it did seem like it was sort of like there was a lot of flaws to that. And then after I took it myself, it was really fascinating because there was I had a lot of emotions about it based on what I was seeing, and it's made me question the subjectivity of it and how they could use those eyes and that criteria for any kind of autism assessment. But I guess what it's got me wondering is, where did this test originate from? Like, what are the origins of the eye test, and why is it used at all in autism assessment?
Totally. And is it valid, right? And one of the things I really liked about that show is that it brought this test that most people would never even see unless they are like in the room getting a clinical autism assessment, or you're like a psychology major or something, into popular culture. And so it's really pushing autism research into a place where it can be discussed. So before we begin, I just want to remind you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. It is not intended to replace professional medical care. We are not doctors. We don't claim to be. We are just a couple of nerds who find this information and this research really fascinating, and we want to discuss it, but please keep your medical decisions between you and your doctor and keep us out of it. All right, let's begin. So let's discuss it. So where did it come from? Well, it is part of this like broader mission of researchers, basically, to prove that autistic people lack theory of mind. So theory of mind is the understanding that other people have minds and that you yourself also have a mind. It's the ability to examine other people's behaviors and recognize that their beliefs, knowledge, and intentions might differ from your own beliefs, knowledge, and intentions. And it's actually kind of an umbrella term for a number of different developmental milestones that we generally talk about with like children when they're developing, age 3, 4, 5, 6, you hit different theory of mind milestones. And so autism researchers kind of have this belief that like all autistic people universally lack theory of mind. And they've spent decades, like ever since the 80s, trying to prove that we all don't have it. And so they've been doing these tests on young autistic kids to show the developmental differences. And so the eye test is one of those theory of mind tests in this sort of battery of different tests, which I'm going to force John to take a number of them today for your entertainment, so we can see the different tests that they give to these kids. And we'll see if John passes the tests.
Oh goodness, I'm nervous. I'm concerned.
Well, if you're autistic, you're gonna fail every single one. No. But one thing I did want to call out. One thing I did want to call out before we kind of jump into it. There's this really good quote from the transmitter, and this is gonna give you a little window into like how we feel about theory of mind tests as well. But like, it's such a good quote. So they said, recently, one of us attended an academic talk about whether non-human animals have theory of mind or the capacity to attribute thoughts and feelings to others. While introducing the topic, the presenter described theory of mind as the capacity that autistic people lack. This comment was unsurprising yet unsettling. A pervasive claim in the scientific literature is that autistic people have a specific deficit in understanding the minds of others. But in this instance, the juxtaposition was particularly jarring. The speaker was questioning whether non-human animals have theory of mind while expressing certainty that autistic people do not. So it's great. They are sure that we don't have theory of mind.
But animals do, right? So it's once again comparing autistic people to animals.
Yeah, which is a trend that we have seen from the beginning of autism research. Very early researchers like Ivar Lovaas have said that we're like shells of humans that have eyes and noses and stuff, but not souls. And you have to like cobble us together to make us seem more human, but that we will never achieve humanity. So there's this very, very long trend of autism researchers comparing us to animals, like saying that we're non-human, stuff like that. So it does fit into that broader trend. Without further ado, John, let's have you take some of these tests and see how you do on theory of mind.
All right, yeah, let's get into it. Let's see what these tests have to say about my theory of mind or lack thereof.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to point out, like I have not seen this, and I have not taken these tests myself. So you're kind of administering this on me for the first time. Is what we're about to do? Is this something that like is standard for autism diagnosis or autism tests, or is this like a one-off that people might come across or do in certain circumstances?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different types of theory of mind tests, and these are all pulled from actual research papers. You know, we're going to link our sources and stuff. So like these are real tests that are in use. Some of them you would administer more towards children, and some of them less so. But there's just this whole suite of theory of mind tests that researchers have been trying to show with, you know, middling success that autistic people can't do these correctly. So these aren't made up. And like, while this is not a clinical setting, this isn't the perfect test because John's on a podcast right now. Like, these are the real questions that would get asked. So.
Okay.
All right.
I've already got thoughts and opinions. So let's see what happens.
Okay, so the first kind of stage of theory of mind that in typically developing kids would come at around like age 3, sometimes even sooner, is just this recognition of basic emotions. And so what they might do is ask you a question like, Sam has won shooting marbles. He has won the most beautiful marble. And then they might show you this graphic of a kid with no face, and then there's a bunch of faces on the right-hand side showing different expressions, and say, choose the face that matches how Sam would feel when he has received the most beautiful marble. So, John, which face?
Wow. When he gets the most beautiful marble. Oh man. Okay, so going from top to bottom, there's 6 faces. One he's crying, one he looks kind of mad, one he's like surprised, and one he's like smug. One he's like flat face, the other one's like whoa. It's the most beautiful marble. So I sort of feel like number 6 is like the most beautiful marble. His mind is blown. But also, number 3, he's like, ooh, the most beautiful marble.
Yeah.
Um, I sort of feel like the test wants me to say number 4 because he's like smiling, the most beautiful marble. Mm. But I kind of feel like, I don't know. Maybe I'm like putting a lot of bias in here. I sort of feel like the most beautiful marble is like, ooh, number 3.
Well, their follow-up question is how come Sam is feeling so happy? So I think you did just fail.
Wow, I did just. Oh my God, this is question number 1. This test for kids. I've already failed.
But I mean, it brings up a great point, right? Like, there are people out there who, when you see something beautiful, you start crying, right? And in this drawing, his crying face, his eyebrows are tilted down. Like, he's like gritting his teeth. So it's not like a happy cry, but like, people
Yeah,
react to things in different ways. And like, I think shock at the fact that you won is also a valid reaction. I don't know. Like, it's not, it depends on who Sam is as a person, how he would react. And I think that us saying that doesn't mean that we don't fundamentally understand that someone lacks a different brain than our own. Right? Like,
yeah,
we aren't like the Borg. We aren't a monolith. Like, Sam might react in different ways. So I think that brings up great points. And also the fact that it's a drawing, like, it's just like these really sort of rudimentary sketches. I don't know. It doesn't feel like the most scientific thing.
yeah. And I think like what's interesting is the first thing when you ask me is like it feels so subjective,
Yeah.
right? Because like you make the point about some people cry when they're happy, but I do wonder like I thought I probably wanted you to pick number 4.
I think so. Because
Um,
yes, how come Sam is feeling happy is the follow up. So I think
yeah,
happy was the correct answer.
yeah, but it's like it's also it's so subjective, and I wonder like even culturally how you would control for any kind of like different cultural bias or cultural representation, um, or even like from the very beginning, right? The whole thing like starts on the idea that I know what marbles is, and that the fact that and I know what a beautiful marble is and why it would make somebody happy. Like honestly, if I asked my kids this right now, they would ask me what is a marble. They have not
Okay,
been
so
exposed.
actually, multiple tests bring up marbles. I don't know why. The researchers are just like really into marbles. I don't know. But also you bring up such an interesting point on the cultural thing. I wasn't sure if we should like pull this into the episode because I didn't know if it was like extraneous, but since you brought it up, people actually do develop theory of mind differently in different countries, and so it is not this like fixed universal thing. In countries that are more Western, more individualistic, you develop diverse beliefs and then knowledge ignorance after that, and those are phases that we're gonna test John on next shortly. But
Great.
in societies that are more collectivist, like China, Japan, and Singapore, those phases are flipped. And so there are literally cultural differences in how theory of mind develops. So it's not a global constant thing.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. Because I could imagine just like culturally the way you're raised, like the whole nature versus nurture side of it plays into the subjectivity, but also like the actual developmental milestones of how people develop. And this was something that when I was taking the eyes test that stuck with me, which is like all of the people in the eyes tests were like they were black and white grainy photos of white people,
Yeah.
right? So it's like you have in order to like take that test, you must first have exposure or thoughts or opinions. However you feel about a bunch of old black and white grainy pictures of white people is going to influence how you do on that test.
Well, do you want to take the next one, recognition of basic emotions? This
Great.
one this one's a little bit more abstract. So you have to watch this video and then narrate like the feelings that these triangles are feeling.
Oh, whoa. Okay. This is I have to. So I'm assessing that emotions of triangles.
Mm-hmm. So again, this is like a legit test that they administer. So what are the triangles feeling?
Um, I have no idea what I'm looking at. There's a triangle. It's going in. It's trying. First, they were dancing, right? They were spinning around. Now this other one's pushing this other one out.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to get the other one to come out. Um, now it's chasing the one a little bit. Now they're like outside and they're. I
Yeah.
have no idea what I
So
just saw.
I can walk you
Um,
through the correct answer from the test.
were they
'Cause
supposed to have it? Were they supposed to have emotion? Were they supposed to have emotions?
Yeah, the researchers
Were
gave
they
these
supposed to be?
triangles this like whole backstory. So it's a mama and a baby. And so they're happily playing in their little box as mamas and babies do. And then the mama wants the baby to get outside of the box, but the baby is too scared to leave the box. So they kiss,
Wow.
and then the
Oh, they
mama
kiss. That's what that.
comes.
Oh, that's a
That's a
kiss.
kiss. That's a triangle kiss. So the mama comes in and pushes the triangle out of the box to like the baby to show it that it's okay. Then the baby gets out of the box. It isn't scared anymore. And so then they dance and celebrate that the baby came out of the box. So that's the correct.
Well, okay. Now that you overlay that whole narrative, now I guess I can see it. Um, it looked like they were dancing. It looks like I failed this one too. Having said all that, I feel like I sort of feel like my kids would have got that though. I feel like they would have seen the baby triangle and the big triangle. I'm wondering if I'm pulling in, if I'm bringing like too much lifelong bias,
Adultness.
and yeah, into this. But also like that one's tricky too because how do you prescribe emotion to those triangles, to the shapes, because they weren't showcasing or like demonstrating any real emotion in a way that a human would encounter emotion in a daily basis or in life or with others. Like you're sort of just watching these shapes move around.
Yeah.
This is making me really wonder about who put these tests together and like what criteria was developed, and how they validated them at all.
Are we even really testing theory of mind in an accurate way? Is the eye test any better than these
Right.
tests? Great questions. And yeah, to your point about the triangle one, if someone said, hey, autistic people score lower on this and therefore they're really bad at interpreting abstract art, I would buy that. But because they're saying, oh, they don't know how to interpret this animation of a triangle, therefore they're bad at like understanding human facial expressions and human emotions and the idea that like other humans feel things. uh
Yeah.
I don't know that you've proven that with that test.
Yeah. Right. That's like
It's a stretch.
that core. It's a stretch. It's a stretch for a correlation. I mean, because you're putting a narrative over it. Like you could say like maybe the triangles were dancing, and you could say it's the dance of the triangles. And when you talk about it, I can describe it that way. It sort of makes sense. Where you say one triangle is trying to get the other triangle to do something, I could see that. But like, if you're giving it a whole story, you may as well say like the box is on fire and it's bursting in flames, and so
They're
it's
trying to
filling up with
save the
smoke,
baby. Yeah.
and so they're trying to save the baby and pull the baby out. Like it's just as much of a stretch as that. As like none of that stuff is there, right? They're not having emotions. They're just moving around and dancing. It's like you could set it to music actually, and I think that would have an interesting. That would if you set it to music that would convey in a completely different way, and that could have some emotion. I still
Yeah.
don't think it's a test at that point, though, right? Like um, it's just like
It's sort of like the
to your point, right?
Rorschach
It's like
test. It's like the ink blot test. So that one actually is interesting
right,
because in popular culture, people are like, "Oh, ink blot test, it's not real," and it did have clinical validity. So when the ink blot test first came out, it was very good at identifying certain like I think I'm good. I hope I don't butcher this, like schizophrenia, like people who were having manic episodes would score meaningfully differently on the Rorschach test. And so it was a good early indicator that someone might be having like a break with reality. And then
Hmm.
clinicians started to expand it and administer it to, people who were not like manic. And then it kind of got this bad reputation for being like bullshit, even though it did have a particular usage because it was, they were trying to do too much with it, right? They're trying to say, like, what are your thoughts and just inner desires and stuff, and it's like, no, it doesn't measure that. The triangle test feels like a similar thing. Like maybe it's your
Yeah.
ability to interpret something that's tremendously abstract, but I think you're trying to do too much when you're saying that it dictates your ability to like recognize and interpret human emotions.
Yeah. Right. And then again, I kind of wonder like how they came to a consensus for the criteria at which they evaluate using to evaluate the
Turns out it's
responses.
just
Right.
a
It's
couple of dudes that one of which we're going to talk about later, Simon Baron-Cohen, but it
okay.
truly is just like a couple of dudes. Anyway, so the next kind of phase in developing theory of mind, and again, the eyes test is a part of the theory of mind that we'll get to later, is diverse desires. And so as a child matures, they start to understand that people feel happy when their desires are fulfilled and that other people might not have the same desire that you do. So to do that type of test, like I might say, hey, John, you have a carrot and a piece of cake. You see Bob over there? You can give him one of those things as a gift. What are you going to give Bob?
Um, I will give him the cake.
And then if I say, did you know Bob doesn't really like cake very much? What would you give Bob?
I would give him the carrot.
Yeah. So that one basically, there's a, how kids will like give you their pony toy and you're like, I don't really like ponies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And there's a certain point in time when kids start to realize, like, oh, just because I'm obsessed with ponies or just because I like cake doesn't mean that my, dad wants to also receive a pony or a slice of cake or whatever. So that's kind of all there is to that.
Yeah. I mean, that one makes sense, right? Because it's like they're interested in something, and it's like they think everybody must be interested in. I mean, I observe this with my kids, right?
Obviously.
Like, yeah, I have, and sometimes with me too. Like, I think everybody is into the things I'm into, but I see this with my kids, which is like my son is he's almost 2, and he's been really into cars, and he loves like showing his little cars, like handing you his little car toys, thinking you're going to be just as excited as he is. But I'm probably reinforcing it by acting really excited and then playing with him.
Yeah.
So he probably thinks that I love cars as much as he does.
Ooh, and that one actually, to skip ahead a little bit, that one is the hidden feelings. So that's the last developmental stage, which is the understanding that people might not outwardly express their inner feelings. So that one is the very last
Whoa.
phase. So he won't know that you're fake excited for a number of years. But so the next one is diverse beliefs, and that's the recognition that seeing something leads to knowing. And it's the understanding that when you see something happen, you're taking in relevant information. And I kind of felt like this one goes really hand in hand with knowledge ignorance, which is the recognition that line of sight matters. So like if I watch someone put an item in a box, but you didn't see it, you were looking the other direction, you don't necessarily have enough context to know that the item is in the box. Like you have to see it to know it. And so the Yoni test is one of the ones that they use to test that. So for this first order cognitive theory of mind, John, Yoni is thinking of blank. What's the answer?
I'm guessing Yoni is that little happy face in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so? So first of all, is that part of the test? Like, is explicit who Yoni is?
I don't actually know how much background they gave people when they were administering this test, but yeah, Yoni is the name of the little like scribble character in the middle, and you have
Okay.
the rabbit in the top left corner, the donkey in the top right, the shark in the bottom left, and the turtle in the bottom right, and then Yoni's in the
And the
middle. So
little
which one is Yoni
okay.
thinking of?
So yeah, if Yoni's a little happy or the little like face, Yoni's looking at the donkey, so he must be thinking of the donkey.
You got this one fast. This one took me a while. I was like staring at this when I was looking at the paper, and I'm like, what the hell are they talking about? Because I didn't notice the eyes. But yeah, the in this little line drawing, the eyes are looking at the donkey, and so you can assume that Yoni loves the or is thinking of the donkey.
Yeah.
Um, and so then they have these other ones where it's like Yoni loves blank, and it's the same thing, uh where it's like Yoni's looking at the elephant, so therefore Yoni loves the elephant. And then they have a tricky one where it's like Yoni is close to blank and he's looking a different direction, but he's physically close to a tomato, so that's tomatoes like the
Okay.
correct answer. And then you can make this more abstract actually, and I think that's more common for the test that they administer to adults. And so it's like Yoni knows that this person knows that something, or third order would be Yoni knows that Bob knows that Sally knows blank. And you can increasingly
Whoa.
do, yeah, like you can make it more and more meta. So this one, this cognitive theory of mind, Yoni is thinking about the fruit that blank wants. And so they have Yoni in the middle, and then they have different faces next to all the different fruits, and the faces are generally looking
Huh.
away. So you so you have to map basically. So John,
Yeah.
Yoni is thinking about the fruit that blank wants.
Uh, Yoni is thinking about the fruit. This one is phrased so weird. I don't know what it's asking me. Now, Yoni's looking at a face on the bottom left that's looking at grapes.
Mm-hmm.
Yoni is thinking about the fruit that blank wants. I don't have context for blank though. Like it's the bottom left, like the bottom left is looking at grapes, but it's not asking about what the fruit is. I don't know who these other people are.
Well, and so when they give it to kids, they just have them point to the correct answer. So they would point to the face
Oh, I
next to the
see.
grapes.
Got it. Got it.
But I am with
I'm
you.
like,
I think that the instructions are phrased in an incredibly confusing way, and I do have to wonder how much the phrasing and like the clunkiness of the test is a confounding variable in all of these results. Like
yeah.
I understand that autistic kids tend to score lower on this, but is it because the autistic kids are confused what they're being asked to do? You know?
Right. 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 Well, and here's another thing, because like what I'm starting to wonder, and I'm curious what if we're gonna get how much we're gonna get into it. Um, what does it actually mean to score low on these tests? Like, what is it actually testing, right? Because it's like I don't. It's not. I might not necessarily. It might not necessarily be a bad thing, because I'm the thing. Clearly, this face is looking at a face is looking at grapes, right?
Yeah.
But I was getting hung up on the details. I'm getting hung up on like the literal interpretation of the things I'm seeing, because it's asking
Which
about. It's
neurodivergent
not,
people tend to do.
yes, right, exactly. Yes, this is my point, and that's not a bad thing, right? That's actually like being detail oriented is like one of the positive things that actually comes along with neurodivergence for all the things that are difficult and challenging. So it's not a bad thing. We've talked a lot before about like um, uh, people who are autistic like are high precision, right? So I would expect them to get hung up on the details. Um, so maybe it's like an indicator. So maybe if they score lower on that, it might be an indicator that then maybe they do have autism. But then I wonder like what
What
is
yeah,
the
what are you
what's the
proving about
where is it
autism?
going? Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yes,
Yeah.
right. Where's it going?
Next is the false beliefs test, and this one is like the most famous theory of mind test hands down. So, false beliefs is just the recognition that other people can believe something that's not true. And they test that with the Sally Ann test. So I can walk you through it, and I'm curious how you score. This one, they like actually like for sure do in a number of autism assessments for adults as well. Because I've seen YouTube videos of people being like, what is this test? Like they just did their assessment and they're like, they gave this to me, what is this? So I do know that they give this one to adults. So anyway, you have, this is Sally has a basket, and this is Anne has a box. Sally has a marble. The marble's come back yet again. She puts the marble into her box and she goes for a walk. Then Anne takes the marble out of the basket and puts it into the box. Now Sally comes back. She wants to play with her marble. Where will Sally look for her marble?
She'll look in the basket because she did not see the other person putting it in the box.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. The Sally Ann test, super famous, super common, like autism and theory of mind test.
I wonder what age to start. Yeah, I wonder what age to start giving this to kids. Do you know?
We should double check this. I want to say it was 6 is when this comes into play.
But like, what this made me think of though, is what's interesting is I'm really curious what any of this has to do with theory of mind, especially like when you think about cartoons in sequence. Then I'm starting to think about comics, comic books. You don't actually have to understand the rules of a comic book to understand the narrative of the comic. There's a lot of comics that just have images that don't even have words, and you can get the story based on the images in it.
Yeah, I do wonder if the sort of low quality art style impacts it. I also think that one of the impacts here could actually be working memory. Because I remember when I first saw this one, I kind of got mixed up, like who's Sally, who's Anne, box and basket, because they're just kind of like uncommon objects in modern day, and so there wasn't really like a good hook in my memory to remember which was which, and so I kind of got confused, like wait, who did what again, you know? If they were more sort of distinctive characters and distinctive objects, I think it would have been a little bit easier. But yeah, you know, we do know that neurodivergent people, autistic people have working memory deficits, and so I do wonder if some of this is like a working memory deficit too, more so.
You know, that's a
yeah
than an interpretation. It's a good point, because like as you were going through it, I didn't want to say anything. But I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm happy to yeah. I truthfully, when you got to the end of it, and you're like, what did I still don't know Sally and Anne. Like by the time I got to the end of it, my answer was like, she thinks that the ball's in the basket, but like I had forgotten her name, right? Like the working memory thing is true. Like I definitely felt like my working memory was taxed, even going through that in the short amount of time we were going through it. So it's like that is a very real. Again, because the working memory thing, the reason I was thinking about comics is like you can redo this and like come up with an answer, and then like go home and read a comic book and totally understand all of that, right? And follow that story, right? And I think that's the point I was trying to make, is like you could get that, you could see this and get lost, and then go like pick up a comic book which is a similar format and understand exactly what's going on with or without a narrative.
Yeah, because it's old and crusty, and it's black and white, and it's like drawn poorly, and the names are similar, and I do think that the quality matters.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last one in this whole stage of development of theory of mind is hidden feelings. And so that one is just the idea that people might not outwardly express their emotions. Like that's why little kids don't understand lying at first, and then all of a sudden they're able to lie, right? And it seems to like come in overnight, and they can understand that. That's that hidden feelings thing, is you know, that you can be deceptive, that someone else might be not deceptive as like a negative connotation, but just that people conceal their feelings.
Yeah.
So do these tests actually measure autism? Well, according to autism researchers, they do. The assertion that autistic people lack theory of mind is promoted by thousands of psychology articles. In fact, the vast majority, over 75% of the top 500 articles indexed by Google Scholar, if you search theory of mind and autism, simply assert that autistic people lack a theory of mind, rather than providing original data to support the claim. So they're saying in 75% of papers, you know, because people are like, there's thousands of papers on theory of mind. They're just saying it. They're not actually proving it in any way. So we're sort of citing each other as evidence without actually, you know, giving original evidence. And then other researchers have been criticizing the concept that autistic people universally lack theory of mind for a long time. So, for example, they point out the fact that in a lot of these studies, some portion of the autistic kids or adults actually pass the tests, which by definition means that this is not a universal indicator of autism, because in every single test, some autistic people pass. So that cannot be the core, because what some of these researchers say, like Simon Baron-Cohen and them say, is that lack of theory of mind is the defining characteristic of autism, and that it ties together all of these like disparate symptoms, because they use the symptom language.
Yeah.
And it has to be theory of mind. Like they're so sure because they think that it puts such a neat bow on it. And yeah, it would cleanly tie everything together if it was true. But like autistic people pass every time. So.
And again, it makes me wonder what, like, as we're looking at these tests, it makes me wonder what any of this has to actually do with theory of mind or autism, for that matter. Because, like, to get to like blanket say this is, to your point, if autistic people passed it, it's hard to say this is a blanket test of autism, and really like how it tests theory of mind, for that matter. What I wonder about, like, are there neurotypical people that are like, we know are so neurotypical, and they're like just passing all of these tests? Like, what's the control? Like, how are they evaluating it? And maybe it's that, like, if you think that your kid is autistic enough to take them to get these evaluations, how much confirmation bias is at play here, right? It's like,
well, and they have neurotypical people for the control group, but another thing that critics point out is that these tests are largely not reproducible, and that's a huge big red flag in science research. That's the whole point of peer review. You're supposed to like test these things over and over and over and come at it at different angles to disprove the criticisms, right? Because you can't prove something with one test. You have to just disprove the other possibilities so many times that you build confidence. And so that's not the way that the research is actually going, to be very blunt. Like, that's not they're not doing a good job. Also, another criticism is that these are generally not predictive. Your performance on one theory of mind test should roughly map to how well you do on another one, right? Like, if it's a universal deficit, and shouldn't they translate to real world situations? Spoiler alert, they don't. They have found actually the trait that tends to universally connect your performance on these tests is language dexterity skills, not autism. And kind of like we talked about, some of these tests are very hard to understand what they are asking. Therefore, your language dexterity skills seem to be a pretty natural fit for what these are actually testing. And that is what other examinations have found, is that it's testing language dexterity.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Like, because it's your ability to understand language and what somebody's communicating to you. It wouldn't make sense if you were not native to that language, or if the thing that you're looking at wasn't something you encountered even every day or talked about every day.
Well, and a lot of autistic kids can also have other learning disabilities, right? Like, they might have dyslexia and stuff like that. Those are very common comorbidities. They might have ADHD. That's an exceedingly common comorbidity. And so, like, that would be a confounding variable in your results when you're looking at how autistic kids perform. It's like, what are their other learning disabilities that might make it harder for them than the average kid to understand written instructions? So that's actually interesting, right? I think, like, looking at it from a like, what else is going on here could be interesting, right? It's like, regardless of like whether or not someone has autism, if we could have tests that could say, like, what else might you struggle with? Are we testing for dyslexia? Are we testing for working memory and ADHD and other things, right? Not to like give you a diagnosis and like maybe to give you a diagnosis, I don't know, but like to understand where you might struggle, to develop a plan or a strategy. And maybe that's where some of this is going, right? Because like these tests are so subjective that at the end of the day, any kind of these subjective tests that are done with an actual like licensed trained clinician are going to be at the clinician's discretion
to interpret. So even if somebody does inconsistent or does like poor or does well, the follow-up questions or however the clinician interprets or navigates the conversation following that, that's ultimately like I think what matters and how these things are likely being used.
Like, what happens if the clinician doesn't explain the directions well, and you just don't understand what you're supposed to do, right? Like that, it's so
Sure.
subjective.
By trying to make it seem like it is a standard when it is so subjective, I think that's where some of the nuance and some of the problems come from. I think the thing that we are picking apart, and the thing that we're spending time talking about, is the degree at which these seem like totally plausible, accepted tests for autism, and it's not clear how they're being evaluated, if they're peer reviewed, how they stand up, how well, like how much they've like stood over time, are they revisited, how they translate to other cultures.
I mean, some of these are literally from the 80s.
Yeah.
But there were other more modern researchers that had similar criticisms of these methodologies, because it's like, what even is this measuring? And so a lot of these like modern researchers, they didn't use the theory of mind vignettes and drawings and stuff, and they looked at real world situations using modern technology. So they'd use methods like eye tracking and interactions that they secretly filmed. And actually what they found in those more modern tests, where it's not kids having to follow instructions or interpret drawings, is that autistic people of all ages skillfully understand other people's intentions, goals, and desires sometimes better than the neurotypical control groups. So it showed the exact opposite when you use stuff like eye tracking and filmed conversations.
That doesn't surprise me at all that they would be better at that. I think something we've talked a little bit about is like, I think if anything, people who are neurodivergent and people with autism are likely like more sensitive and more in touch with their emotions than neurotypicals. And I think like most researchers up until recently even thought. A lot of it feels so much like confirmation bias, right? It's like, how do we prove this person has autism? How do we prove they lack theory of mind for some reason, right? And that's why I was like hung up on like, what do you do after that? What's the conversation after that, right? Like, what resources do you get? What does it? What's the benefit of proving somebody has theory of mind or not? And is this even? Because these tests clearly doesn't seem like they're really good indicators.
To kind of circle back to our original question, why was the eye test made? When did it come up? It's yet another attempt at proving the lack of theory of mind. The loyalists to the theory of mind theory are just stubbornly trying to find the next great test that will just prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that autistic people have this deficit. And so because they started this whole theory of mind thing in the 80s, and it was originally developed in 1997, so it's like a much later iteration of that effort.
So the eye test came later. It was like they were that.
To basically summarize 2 decades of research, they went, autistic people lack theory of mind. Dang it, this test didn't show it. Autistic people lack theory of mind. Dang it, this test didn't show it. Fast forward to 1997. Autistic people must lack theory of mind. The eyes test, that one's gonna show it.
Yeah. So again, this gets back to like what bothers me about this so much, which is that it feels like they're trying to prove autistic people don't have theory of mind for some reason. Why? I don't know. But it doesn't sound like they're trying to find resources to help them with any actual deficit or any
and
actual
on a lot of
real
those
thing.
tests, you'll have like 20% of the autistic subjects will pass, and they'll get the same score as neurotypical. And so again, it comes back to
Right.
it's really measuring linguistics. But, the eyes test is not necessarily a linguistics measure. I guess it's something else. So to get into the way that they developed it, the researchers, God, this kills me. They created it in 1997 by selecting photographs of pairs of eyes out of magazines. Like I just love the visual image. These like researchers like flipping through magazines. They're like, those are some good eyes. They cut it out. Next, the group of researchers picked a correct mental state descriptor along with 3 incorrect response options for each photograph. And so they Well, and actually, originally, when it first came out in 1997, they only had two descriptors. They'd pick a correct and an incorrect one. And then they later went and tested that with a group of 8 judges. And if at least 5 of those judges selected the correct response and no more than 2 selected the same incorrect response, the eyes became part of the official test. Otherwise, they would change the descriptor words until they accumulated 40 eyes that they could use as potential versions. So
I have so many emotions about this because, like, this group of researchers, do we know how many researchers there were?
So it was 8 judges who were judging the correctness, and the researchers didn't like get the correct responses from anything that was intrinsic to the photograph. Like, it wasn't like on the photograph it wrote, "This is me being happy." They just like came up with the descriptors and then had 8 judges essentially validate. 5 out of 8 judges. They only needed 5 out of 8 validate.
So you're telling me even as they were developing the test, people didn't agree
Yeah.
on what the eyes were conveying?
The test kind of went through a number of iterations as well that were kind of weird. So like originally it was 2 choices instead of 4. So you'd only have like happy, sad, and they were all semantically opposite. And so you could really deduce based on, is this a positive tone or a negative tone? So that's what semantic opposite means, is you would never have an option that was like angry, sad, because those are semantically similar. They're both negative. You'd only have happy, angry, or excited, sad. And it also skewed it a lot more female faces than male. So in a later iteration, they had to add in more male faces. And so they ran it with these judges, and what they found when they started to test it on people is that it was really easy to get 100%. And you'd get a lot of times where like kids would score the same as their parents because you just had to kind of know, is this a positive tone or a negative tone? And that's it. And so they went in, added more male faces, they added more complex language, and then allowed the participants to use a thesaurus. So again, we start to get into the territory of linguistic understanding, right? Because they said that the test was too easy when they used the simpler language, and they had to make it harder so that it was an effective differentiator. A test is not good when a bunch of people are getting 100% to suss out, to like tease out these differences. So they're like, we have to make it harder. Let's make the words more complicated. So again, we've introduced the language component with their iterations.
What blows me away about this is like the degree that it continues to just be like just crackpot, like them finding stuff in magazines, deciding whether or not this was an emotion, giving it some words, adding more to it. Like, why 40? Like, this feels like the least scientific thing I've ever heard of. They're just like some random people are picking out of magazines a bunch of like white actors conveying some assigned emotion instead of like putting any kind of actual scientific validity to it. Like saying we want to develop a test that helps people identify emotions. So we're going to write down the emotions we want people to write it out as a criteria. Like, here's the emotions we want to get. Now let's go photograph people making those faces or finding people making those emotions. It feels so reversed, right? It's like, and then like it's like around for this long and has like barely been revised that much.
Yeah.
Right. Like you would think that they would find out this isn't working, and then actually like make it design a test to better do the thing they want it to do. But it sounds like they were just adding it more crappy photos.
So one thing I forgot to mention, these are not just like random crackpot researchers. This was developed by Simon Baron-Cohen, who is one of the most prominent autism researchers on the planet. Just to give you, I guess, a window on the quality of autism research that has taken place over the last number of decades. This guy is the best of the best. Okay, he works at Cambridge University. He is the head of the autism research department at Cambridge, and he was knighted, because he lives in the UK, for his incredible achievements and his contributions to the autistic community, which A lot of autistic people are not his biggest fan, myself included. So these are not just random like master's students. Like this is like the guy, and this is his methodology. Um, and so
he should know better.
he should. Which, by the way, we have another episode called "Why Won't Autistic People Kill Kittens," where we go into some of these other really stupid tests. Like this is not an isolated thing. Autism researchers pull this all the time. But anyway, so to validate his test, once they had landed on the 40 perfect magazine eyes, and that they assigned the correct emotions to, and didn't like ask the actors how they were feeling in these magazine clippings. They ran one single study to validate their test to prove that AQ scores are inversely correlated with the eye test. So AQ is one of the other autism assessments you can take, which, by the way, was developed by Simon Baron-Cohen. So he's validating his test against his test, which AQ...
Wow, it goes further.
Which AQ is another one that we use widely still today, but it's faced a lot of criticism. In particular, autistic women tend to score lower on AQ and even score sometimes subclinical versus other autism assessments like the RADS are. But the AQ is still like one of the biggest ones that they use in validating research. So, knowing this guy, by the way, he also thinks that autism is extreme male brain. He thinks that anyone who's autistic has just a really masculine man brain. And he still, to this day, stands by that. So that's how he developed AQ.
So it's manly. You're saying having autism is manly.
Yes. Which that we don't need to get into it. That needs to be a whole other episode, going into extreme male brain. But yeah, so they validated eyes test against AQ, and they also wanted to validate that women score higher than men on the eye test, and therefore women are less autistic. So he's like, he builds all of his theories upon his theories. So in order to test this in their one single study, they had 4 groups of people. Group number 1 was 15 men with level 1 autism. So these are like high masking, lower support need autistic people who self-selected based off an advertisement in an autism magazine. So I'm like, that's kind of a biased group because it's these British men who happen to read autism magazines. That's how they recruited 15 whole men to validate this autism assessment.
So they only validated it with men from an ad they put in an autism magazine?
And only 15 of them. Yeah. 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 And then they had group 2, one of their control groups was 122 non-autistic adults from the local community. However, they never administered the AQ on this group. So we just assume that the local community couldn't possibly have anyone else who's autistic of a sample of 122 people. But they did give them an IQ test to make sure that they were higher IQ. And then group 3 was 103 male Cambridge students. And they were tested for AQ, so to see how autistic they were, but they were not tested for IQ because they were like, oh, Cambridge students, they must be smart. And then group 4 was matched pairs of 14 people with IQs similar to the autistic folks from group 1. So what matched pairs means is that they will find someone who's like your doppelganger. Like they'll look at like your age, your physical health, particular characteristics. So they found 15 other men who were similar in every way to the first group of autistic people, except for they didn't have autism. And then they ran the test.
So you had 4 groups.
Mm-hmm.
All 4 groups are different from each other and sourced with different methods with zero control, right? Is there
and about half of them were never tested for autism.
How does any of this hold up to peer-reviewed scrutiny?
Great question. However, it's considered a strong study because it has a large sample size.
This makes no sense, and this makes no sense. This keeps getting like more and more off the rails, and I'm still hung up on like the 40 magazine clippings, like because earlier you said people are passing 100%, and so they want to make it harder, and so like instead of redesigning the test, they just added
They
more
changed the
magazine clippings
words.
to it.
Yeah.
They changed the words, yeah. So like,
Which don't
wouldn't you
you think that would
it,
change the feeling to, you know, like if it's like, what if this person just genuinely is feeling happy? Like, I don't know that changing it to elated has the same meaning, right? Like, because then it gets
right,
into like,
right,
well, what is elated? Like, so yeah, they
yeah.
just like
They
changed the
just
words to make it harder. And I'm like, does that even hold? But they made up the
yeah.
first set of labels in the first place anyway. So it's,
And then instead of deciding, well, this isn't a very good test, let's make a better one. Like they doubled down on it. Like you're out of university. You have access to a bunch of like students. They're in one of these groups, right? Like these students. So why if you were gonna actually like do this with any kind of like intentionality? I guess that's like what I'm hung up on here is the intentionality, like and the accuracy is like, wouldn't you first write down a series of emotions and then a series of emotions, those emotions are not, and then bring students in?
you know what I would do for better authenticity? I would take photos of students in the wild so they're actually genuinely expressing these emotions. Ask them to describe their own emotion and then say, like, do you consent to having your face being
Oh,
part
that's
of this
good.
test? Because then it's not
That's good.
acting. Because the magazine, they're
Yeah,
acting because they got paid to do a photo shoot. So it's
right. And
like,
that alone would skew it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So to recap, it's not the authentic emotion. It's not the label that the actor would attribute to it. It's not the original label because they went and tried to make it harder. And then they tested that on 15 autistic men and said, hey, this assesses autism. Yep. That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Even if they had like written down the emotions they actually wanted to test and then found people and then took photos of them and asked them what emotion they were feeling and then matched that to the things they wanted to test, I'm still not convinced that of what that test would be testing.
That's a great point too. What are we even doing here? Why the eyes? You know, and remarkably, it was not until 2019 that a study was published that like asked people to generate their own responses instead of using the labels that the researchers originally came up with back in 1997. So when they did that
So
second,
this
so that was just they let it stand until 2019 and they were like, great, good job, Simon.
this was just out in the wild
Yeah.
until 2019.
So the first thing was 2019, where they were like, just write in your own label instead of using the labels that the researchers came up with. So in that study, less than 10% of responses were similar in meaning to Simon Baron-Cohen's correct response, and only
Wow.
40% of those responses even shared the same affective valence as the correct response. So meaning if the correct answer was a positive thing like happy, only 40% of the time did the test subjects also do a positive emotion. Or if the correct one was, sad. I was trying to think of a bigger word for it, sad. And it was a negative one. Again, only 40% of the time would they pick a negative label. So people were wrong more often than not when they were able to do a write-in response instead of a multiple choice. So that contrasts sharply with the correct response rate of
Wow.
70% when you do the standard multiple choice eye test, right? Because they only got it right 10% of the time in terms of similar meaning. So 10% versus 70%.
Actually, so as you're talking about that, I'm hearing something else that's actually quite interesting, which is, first of all, like 2019 is like way too recent for anything that had been done since 1997 on this thing, right?
Yeah.
But when you're telling me that they updated it and they let people write it in, and the responses are different from what Simon Baron-Cohen put as the criteria, what you actually start to have now is a really big analysis on Simon Baron-Cohen. right?
Yeah, it's like,
Like
what
like
does he see
there's
in the eyes?
there's a different way to read this data that is fascinating to me, right? Like if he's the one that ultimately like gave it this criteria and these words, and you have the results, I and you have you have a large sample size, you can actually use. I would love to look at the sample size and actually look at the averages, and then can like pull the data out to look at like as a study of Simon Baron-Cohen.
We can say
I
with
think
confidence that
that
Simon
would be
Baron-Cohen interprets eyes the same as 10% of the population. So this is not probably testing what we think it's testing. And the transmitter, again, surveyed 1,461 studies that administered the eyes test, because this wasn't the only one that used the eyes test, but what they found is that 63% of the studies did not provide evidence from any of the 6 key categories used to assess empirical validity for psychological tests. And when that evidence was reported, it frequently indicated poor quality. So basically, you have to meet these particular criteria in these 6 categories to show, like, yep, this is an empirically valid test. We don't have any confounding variables. We don't have conflict of interest. We don't have all these things to show that it's like that it is a study that can be relied on for other studies. So yeah, 63% of them didn't cite anything. The ones that did cite it, it was poor quality. So that means that almost all these studies don't meet the guidelines published by the American Psychological Association. Most of the studies just cite the original paper that he ultimately published in 2001 to prove that their study is also valid. So they say Simon Baron-Cohen's study is valid, therefore mine is too, instead of retesting whether or not that their own test is valid. So like, they're just citing him and then running it again without reassessing.
That's a problem with like the assessment. It's a problem with like looking at the validity, and the fact that like what I was saying a minute ago, that you can almost reverse engineer this, look at like a large data set in order to interpret the creator of the test is a huge issue, right? Like there's a reason there's a reason peer reviewed tests and these kinds of tests are done with like large sample sizes with controls that have like an agreed upon criteria. It's so that you cannot reverse engineer to look at what the creator is saying about the actual outcome of a test. That introduces way too much bias, and the fact that no one that it made it through for that long, like that, all of this scrutiny feels obvious.
Well, and some of the times when they re-administered it, autistic people didn't score lower. So it's actually muddy. It's a little bit mixed. And it also has circular reasoning. So that's one of the major problems. So autistic people perform worse on the test, which proves that the test is valid. The test proves lack of theory of mind, which proves that the test is valid. So that's like circular reasoning. And that's actually pretty common with psychology tests, because it's harder to measure these things versus a test that's like, we looked at a brain scan or a blood sample or something. It's less concrete. So like, yes, psychology does have circular reasoning, but you're supposed to address it by refining the theories and then testing them. And then that's exactly what they didn't do. They didn't refine it. They didn't put it up to like hard scrutiny. They just used it as evidence that their own studies were also valid. And so we literally have thousands of tests out there that make it seem like on the surface this thing is like so well studied and so valid, but when you dig in even just a little bit, they don't stand up. When they did finally make an update, because the crazy thing is that this eyes test, it still gets taught, it still gets used in clinical settings. When I was doing research for this, I actually ended up watching a lot of videos for psychology students, because they make test prep materials, because I wanted to find something good that like explained theory of mind. Just show you guys the video, but we ended up explaining it ourselves. But anyway, they still are like actively teaching this in schools today, and they're actively future students are still learning it. But at the very least,
how are we
like, how have we not
how are we still talking about this?
I don't know. But it did get an update. The silver lining, Because my biggest gripe with autism tests is that they're very outcome based instead of process based. And you see this a lot with the AQ test that Simon Baron-Cohen also made. It's not like, hey, do you struggle in social situations? It's, do you have friends? You know, and so it's like, well, if you've worked really hard to get a different outcome, it doesn't take into account the process by which you got there. And so basically, Professor Tony Atwood and Dr. Michelle Garnett tried to take this test and make it more process-based, where they don't necessarily care about your overall score. There's a pretty wide range of average scores for autistic people and for neurotypical people, and there's quite a bit of overlap. But what they did look at is your total time to answer, with the idea being that autistic people are probably on average going to take longer than neurotypical people for the eyes test, and the approach that you took. Like, how did you come to choose that answer, whatever it may be? And they have found that they believe this does a better job of differentiating between autistic and non-autistic people. However, it should also be noted that while these changes have been adopted in clinics, there's never been a formal study even exploring the validity of this unofficial update. So even though in theory it sounds better and more reasonable, it's never even been tested. And now clinics use that updated version.
It goes further down the rabbit hole.
And that's what we saw in the rehearsal. It was this test.
And that's what we saw. Yeah. And Nathan struggling. I do like in the show how he was like sort of describing it as he was going and like kind of calling it out and talking through the way he was thinking about it. I thought it was a good. It sort of seemed like he was kind of asking, like it was doing in the show. It was doing two things. It was him sort of asking about the test itself and sort of trying to make sense of its role, while also trying to paint it as if he himself had autism because he was struggling with it. So it played an interesting role in the show, and it's interesting to have like for there to be so much attention around it, and still like that we're using this, that this is like something that is still taught and talked about, given like all of the things we've discussed, the issues we've discussed about it.
So I think at the end of the day, we can't necessarily use this test to like certainly to definitively prove that you have autism. One of the interesting things is that John and I had our family and friends like take this test, and what I noticed is that a lot of people approached it in very different ways, which I thought was fascinating. So for example, my partner and his friend both said that they approached it using vibes. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Like, how did you actually get the right answer? And when I dug in, they did not mean the same thing. So what my partner did, what a number of other people did, is they'd have to like imagine the lower half of the face, like construct it and then gauge. But what his friend who has dyslexia had to do was listen to the theme music. Like he would imagine it like a movie and listen to the theme music, and based on the tone of the music that he heard in his head, that's how he would pick his answer. So I thought that was like so cool, such an interesting way that his brain was processing it. Mine was very similar. I had to almost reverse engineer it. Like I would, whenever I see the eyes, I see a scene in a movie, and then I listen to the dialogue of the characters in this scene, and based on the dialogue, I pick the right tone. So it's a very sort of visual way to picture it. Other people looked at like, you know, very concrete measures like the eyebrows and stuff like that, but there was just such a diversity in the way that people like answered on this test. And so I think it shows something fascinating. I don't know that it shows autism.
Right. Or even theory of mind, right? Like it's really interesting hearing the way you describe it, because like it's very imaginative, right? You're constructing a whole world, and you're imagining these people as characters doing something. And I think to your point earlier, like the process part of that is fascinating. It's not which answer you chose. It is your process for it, trying to imagine what these people are thinking. Like when I was looking at it, I was like, what were these people saying to me as they were giving me that look, right?
That was a common one I heard too, is how would I feel if someone was looking at me like that, or what are they saying? So I thought that was another common one.
Talking through it that way. And again, if you were evaluating this in a clinical setting and you're able to talk through your process in that way, that reveals a lot more than multiple choice.
Yeah, this was an exhausting test. A lot of people got tired around like question 10. So I think the whole thing is just too long. Maybe that's the point. Um,
Well, I think yeah,
like,
the whole like staring at someone's eyes with like it being overstimulating and having a lot of like cognitive effort.
but I think at the end of the day, my takeaway was that I never realized how much my brain works to try and interpret the emotions of others, because my test time was like 9 minutes. I scored really high. I got like a 32 out of 36, but it took me 9 minutes. And so I am better than the average neurotypical, but I have to have a lot of cognitive work, and so it gave me a real appreciation for myself about like how I have developed these methodologies without even consciously doing it, and how I have acquired this like very high level of accuracy of reading people in my own way. So I think it, if anything, the test gave me a real appreciation for my brain and how good it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I don't I yeah, I don't know what it's testing. But it sure doesn't sound like it's what they set out for. There's not enough intentionality for it to really be conclusively anything. So yeah, maybe we'll do we'll do a follow on where we take the test and realize I can't remember my score. So
Let's do
a
it.
follow on.
Let's do it. Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, file this away as you would like a personality test. Not very scientific, but maybe kind of fun.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect way to think about it. Perfect way to talk about it, and great way to close. So if you've made it this far in the episode, thank you so much for listening. Give us a like and a subscribe. It goes a long way in helping a small channel like ours grow.
And stay tuned for a lot more research, as always.